So we're going to talk with the Standard Beagle development team, and hopefully this can turn into a series, but they're so friggin' hilarious that I decided that it might be fun to have you all think about some of the topics that we're thinking about. So today, I want to introduce Andy Brummer and John Hazelwood, uh, who've been in and around computers for a very, very long time. I learn every day. And today we're going to talk about DNS because this is the biggest question we get from clients who don't understand how it works. So I'm going to throw this out to you guys. What do we mean when we ask for a DNS? What does that even mean?
You want to take the lead on this one?
No, John, do you want to?
So DNS, domain name service. It does a really simple thing, but it gets really complicated because it's so powerful in what you can accomplish through DNS. So in the most basic of terms, your computer and the inner Google web nets, they don't really speak English. They speak in numeric terms. So DNS is a service that takes www.whatever.com and turns it into a numeric value, which represents an address on the internet. So when you type in a URL, DNS helps route that traffic to a very specific destination.
So like, okay, so standardbeagle.com, it's the name, and say we're at 1112, and the DNS is what points that name at our where our site is living.
That's right. And there's
Yep.
a network of DNS servers globally that help make all that happen. So you at home, if you're say a Comcast internet subscriber, you send it from your computer to find standardbeagle.com. It hits their domain name server first. They have a record, great. Then it sends you on its way. And if it doesn't have a record, then it knows what to do to send you in the next link in the chain to a DNS server that does have a record. And you might hop around for a few hops before you find a record. And then boom, it sends you to, WP Engine's hosting, which then knows where specific within their ecosystem, which specific server to send that request, which then responds with the webpage, standardbeagle.com.
Mm-hmm.
So then what are some of the common misconceptions around DNS?
So one of them is that DNS does anything other than telling your computer which other computer to talk to. So it doesn't actually make the connection between your computer and the other computer.
Correct.
It just tells your computer which other computer to go find. So that's because of that, it doesn't do things like redirections and things like that. So you actually need to connect to the other computer and figure out the third computer that you need to go to.
Wait a minute, you can't do redirections with the DNS at all?
Right.
Okay.
That's one of the ones that we run into a bit.
Well, so how do you do that? If you have www.standardbeagle.com, but you want everything to go to just standardbeagle.com, isn't that a redirect?
So yeah, that is a redirect, and there's literally a equivalent of a page that the server gives your computer that says, I'm sorry, you wanted standardbeagle.com. It's like this one field called location, and you need an actual web server to make that happen.
So you would put that on the host.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay. So we have the domain name, and that is a domain name host. And then there's the web server, which is another host. Sort it out. What do we do?
So yeah, when you go to like the DNS, when you go look up a name, it looks up the entire name. So www.standardbeagle.com is a full unique name. So it goes and gets the address for that. Now, just standardbeagle.com is another completely separate name, and it goes and gets the the IP address or the address for that. So those are like separate records within like DNS for Standard Beagle.
Yeah.
And
So
they can both point to the same like web server, but they are separate addresses.
this is where we start to fall down the rabbit hole. So you got
Yeah.
to remember that DNS, the S stands for service. So part of that service is the translation of these words to the numeric values. And it's a hosted service. So like if you buy your domain name at GoDaddy and you leave your domain registered at GoDaddy, GoDaddy hosts what's called the zone file. And the zone file contains all these various permutations. Just standardbeagle.com has this address that it's supposed to go to. www.standardbeagle.com has a numeric value where it's supposed to go to. You can have a bunch of different subdomains like mail.standardbeagle.com goes to this other address, etc. So the zone file contains all these different settings for a particular and single domain so that all of those little things can be facilitated. All your subdomains, all your MX records to control where your email traffic goes. And you can have different subdomains set up to handle traffic on different ports for specific types of communication. Like I said, it does a very simple thing, but it's super powerful. So it gets intimidating and can be overwhelming to new people jumping into the DNS game because it is capable of so much. But at the end of the day, it's a name to a number, and that's it.
Yeah, but like who manages that stuff?
Super nerds.
I mean, because like when we work with our clients, they often are not having us manage their DNS. Like,
Hmm.
or we might get just you know, just enough to manage, say, Cloudflare or something like that. Because a lot of times we're not supposed to be touching their domain name stuff at all, you know?
So, it is an important topic because there's um a lot of issues with security um and like ownership of all that information. That's like super important. So if someone has control of your DNS, like they can have complete control of like where all your email is. They can
True.
read, they can set it up so that they could read all your email. They could set it up that and make it look like you're spamming people. Like
And this is
there's a lot of issues around people having control of DNS. So it's typically um something that someone who's serious about their reputation on the internet wants to have a lot of control over. So you typically will not give it to the company that's building your website. Uh,
that's fine because honestly, for as being web developers, um, I think I speak for everyone when I say we have more than an appropriate appreciation for security and corporate identity, and we don't want any more access, not one pixel or iota more access than exactly what we need.
yeah. So, so that being said, like there's a lot of things where um when we're actually moving between servers or like launching a site, when we need to tell the appropriate people to make the updates to DNS or be empowered to do it ourselves. And so uh so we have to work closely with the people managing DNS, particularly when we're making updates to people's websites.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
what about like some of those services that become a proxy? So like, or maybe I'm not using the right word, but like Cloudflare. Say somebody's using Cloudflare. Well, how does that fit in to the DNS and web server? Doesn't it sit in between? And that changes things a little bit.
yeah. So the way Cloudflare works is that they will okay. So this is where we get into kind of the details of like how DNS, how like the value you enter on someone's website goes into DNS and that gets sent out to everyone's computer in the entire world, right? Um, so when you buy a domain, right? There's a the zone file that John was talking about. And pretty much these days, like back in the day, you would go and actually work with the zone file directly, um,
That is
because
old school. You're right.
that is the original DNS and all that kind of stuff was set up
Mhm.
that way. Since uh like the modern era, almost always you're on a website that is actually editing the zone file through that. And those zone files are hosted on what is called a name server.
Mhm.
And when you buy your domain, you can go in and tell that um, domain registrar where you want the name server to be. And then they go and point their servers to the name server, and that pulls this zone file and replicates it out to the internet. And so Cloudflare, they they manage a set of name servers. And so you buy your domain and then you go tell them to go point at Cloudflare. And then you can go log into Cloudflare and edit the DNS records on Cloudflare, which your registrar looks up and tells the whole rest of the internet um, to go use this one particular file that's hosted on Cloudflare. So that in general is like how you get the data out there to the internet. What Cloudflare does beyond that is they have a bunch of reverse proxies. And so what they also do is they let you go into your DNS record and toggle a little switch that says instead of us giving an address to your computer, we'll give an address to one of Cloudflare's computers. And that computer will go in and make a connection uh to our to the server that's hosting the website, and it'll act as an intermediary or a proxy for that computer, for that server. And why would you want to do that? Because it gives you like caching and performance, it gives you extra security, it gives you a whole bunch of other things that Cloudflare provides pretty cheaply.
Enterprise level things for much larger web deployments,
Hmm.
but for smaller smaller clients, smaller businesses. So
Yeah.
if you're just got, real estate company, Cloudflare will help you with the things that Andy just mentioned in terms of caching. So you got faster page loading and security and so on and so forth. But once you become Nike and you're selling globally, then Cloudflare is not going to be big enough for you. They'll hate to hear me say that, but you'll have an IT department that's big and robust enough that you've got your site co-located on multiple continents and load balanced and so on and so forth. Those are entirely different topics. But even for the Nikes of the world, DNS takes a name and turns it into a number.
Mhm.
What are
Yeah. The
what? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, even having worked at some of the Nikes of the world, they still actually have a place for Cloudflare in there.
See, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna wrap up unless y'all have something you want to add. What are some mistakes that you've seen when people are thinking about or purchasing their domain name and then setting it up? I can tell you what I think is one of the mistakes.
Yeah.
Go.
If you need to own your domain name, like I'll have clients that want to purchase it through, like have us purchase it, and you don't want to do that. Like you buy it. You buy and own, because transferring it is a pain in the tush. It is super hard, and I don't recommend it to anybody.
So at the root of all of this is a company, and I remember the acronym. It's ICANN, ICANN. And nerdy fun fact: you don't actually own your domain name; you lease your domain name, which is all in the fine print of it. But it's important because it's just your intellectual property, and for the reasons Cindy just mentioned, you want to have your intellectual property wrapped up tight. So if you're in a business, buy it for multiple years. Remember, store your passwords and your credentials somewhere, because jumping through the hoops to reestablish credentials to log in and rebuy your domain name through anybody, whether it's Two Cows or Network Solutions or GoDaddy or Bluehost or whoever, there are dozens and dozens, hundreds of registrars. They all take the security very, very seriously, up to the point where you're like trying to find scans of somebody's driver's license to send in, and you want to make sure that whoever the person is the registrar, is somebody who's going to stay with your business for theoretically for eternity, because changing out those contacts is equally difficult.
Yeah, and I remember that we had a long time ago a client who had somebody else purchase it who let it lapse. And then all of a sudden, like they don't have a domain name anymore. All the email failed, the website failed, and they couldn't get this person on the phone. I think they finally resolved it, and they're mad at us, right? But we didn't, it was a DNS thing, and they hadn't renewed it because this other person was supposed to renew it who hadn't done their job. And
Mhm.
so own it and renew
Yeah.
it when you get it.
Yeah, that's right.
And one of the things that is attached to your domain name is like all your Google search rankings.
Yes.
So like if you like lose, you might think, oh, we'll just do you know, uh whatever business name.us, the .com like expired or whatever. You're starting from scratch on rebuilding all your search credibility.
Yeah,
So,
don't go hopscotching around with your domain name.
yeah.
Mm.
And you don't want to have another one that used to be more common is that people would buy multiples and then
Oh,
host them all on host the same content on them.
Oh,
That's really bad for your search results.
yeah, you can't do that. You're
yeah.
supposed to redirect, right? Like if you had like the
Mhm.
.net and you just redirect that to like the .com or
Yep.
something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to host the same content multiple domains.
Well,
Yeah.
and Google always figures it out sooner or later. You might think you're going
Yeah.
to trick them, but you're not going to.
Oh,
Yeah.
they're too smart.
Yeah.
Too
So
smart for us.
Yeah, so that was something that came up and is not really common to uh anymore, but used to happen.
No, it did absolutely happen. You're right. I remember that dealing with clients that tried to have 5 different sites with the same content, thinking that their footprint was 5 times bigger.
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
Google will penalize you
Nope.
for that. They'll take you
Nope.
down.
Yeah.
I don't even know. It's hard enough to keep up with all the changes at Google, and they won't tell you exactly. We can just see the impact of it.
Mhm.
So, but
Mhm.
They
that's
used to be a little more transparent, but they've gotten real cagey about it in the last decade.
yeah. And that's his conversation for our next Dev Talk, right?
Yeah,
All
and I
right.
mean, I worked at a place that was part of the problem, honestly.
Which place? Oh, you're not going to name that
That's the
place. We'll just have
cliffhanger.
to
Dun,
like
dun,
guess. Dun dun
dun.
dun. All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate you. We'll be back next week with our next Dev Talk.